other animal offers us such a great and rewarding challenge, such heart-pounding thrills as the white-tailed deer. They are the very spirit of the outdoors. They are mystic gentleness of mood and form. They are the embodiment of wild grace. They are creatures of superlatives. Shy, wise, prolific. Elusive, devoutly admired, eagerly sought, and zealously protected. The whitetail is all of this and more. In this tape, you will learn about the deer's nature and senses, his scenting ability, hearing, sight, and other survival mechanisms, and his need for food and cover. Only after you fully understand the whitetail can you enter his world to see deer on purpose instead of just by chance. By knowing the whitetail, you will become a better hunter with gun, bow, camera, or binoculars. Your guide into the whitetail's world is award-winning outdoor writer and cinematographer Jerry Chiappetta. He has spent more than 30 years not only hunting deer with gun, bow, and camera, but in also hunting for solid information about deer and in sorting out fact from fancy.
There are approximately 30 subspecies of deer, with differences apparent only to a trained biologist. One of the more obvious differences, however, is in size, between the size, for example, of the tiny Florida key deer and the bigger bucks of the upper Midwest. A key deer is no larger than a collie dog with a top weight of less than 50 pounds. On the other hand, a typical northern buck will run around 200 pounds. One of the heavyweights on record was a Michigan giant which dressed out at 354 pounds. It was estimated to have had a live weight on the hoof of 424 pounds. This is more like the average Midwestern whitetail, roughly 3 feet tall at the shoulders. This happens to be an adult doe of 2.5 years of age that was in the Michigan Wildlife Department deer pens near Houghton Lake, Michigan. When you see them leaping in the wild with head held high and that big white flag or tail waving in the breeze, of course, they appear much bigger. This one happens to be a Michigan adult buck, although it is a spike. Again, you can see the relative size. We have more deer today than when Columbus discovered America. The whitetail is so adaptable, he's still expanding in numbers despite the shrinking of our wild lands. Deer have been able to use their natural survival mechanisms to thrive right under our noses. Game managers are to be credited for maintaining healthy whitetail populations, which are found in nearly all the lower 48 United States. Whitetails range from Nova Scotia to British Columbia and down into parts of South America. Mule deer and blacktail overlap part of the whitetail's range in sections of the west and southwest. Regardless of the whitetail's size or his location, all deer have nearly identical needs, senses, and characteristics. The whitetail's most important natural defense mechanism is his nose. It is amazing. Just how far a deer can smell depends on a number of factors. For example, if it's a damp day, human scent lingers and deer can smell danger for longer periods of time and for longer distances. If it is a hot, dry, windy day, human scent does not hang around. As the sun warms the ground, warm air rises, carrying scent with it. As it cools later in the afternoon, that cooler and heavier air carries the hunter's scent down into the valleys. Remember, one day a deer may wind you only 100 feet away. The next day, with the conditions right, when the sun comes out and it's warm like it is now, the air currents are different, he may wind you 100 yards away. The real important thing is never underestimate the deer's ability to smell you. Observing or hunting deer from a tree stand does not guarantee that the deer won't smell you. This hunter is demonstrating, with colored smoke, just what scent is doing. Of course, scent itself is invisible. In a dead wind, perfectly calm situation, scent spreads farther the longer one stays in the same spot. Human ears provide about 3.5 inches of reflective surface. A deer's ears are roughly 8 times larger than ours. In addition to size, a deer can swivel his ears like radar screens in different directions and at the same time. Every sound that a deer hears doesn't send him hightailing it. I've watched deer bed down next to railroad tracks and never even twitch when a train roars by. And I've seen them flee at the click of a rifle safety. Another example of this came from wildlife biologists who could get pretty close to a herd of deer they were studying, but only when they drove their old wildlife department vehicle. When they got their new vehicle with its new sounds, apparently the deer didn't like it and they all spooked. Some sounds actually will attract deer, some man-made sounds, such as these chainsaws. They're attracting deer in a logging area because the deer associate that noise with food. Apply this type of information when scouting areas that are recently logged. The whitetail's third major defense is in his ability to see. They're crepuscular animals. Deer are creatures of twilight. They're most active in early morning and in the evening. Their dim light vision is outstanding, as is their ability to see contrasts, such as shiny objects, contrasting colors, and most importantly, any movement. Movement in the wild caused by nature will not frighten deer, just as natural sounds won't alarm them. These are what I call natural movements, compared to unnatural or foreign movements. However, if a blue jay or a squirrel becomes increasingly alarmed by human activity, then this type of alarmed behavior will alert deer. Moving about should never be abrupt. since such moves are even more detectable by deer. We used to believe that deer were colorblind. New studies at the Rose Lake Wildlife Experiment Station in Lower Michigan showed that deer can distinguish red better than any other color, especially the brighter shades of red and orange. There is another sense which deer have which we simply can't measure, and that's the sixth sense. It is the one wild animal ability we cannot explain away or counteract. Deer just seem to know whether I'm carrying a 35mm camera or a .35 caliber rifle. Of course, I can always get closer to them with the camera than I can with a rifle. Ever since prehistoric times, deer and their ancestors have been prey animals, attacked and eaten by various predators. They are creatures which would rather run than stand and fight. Running doesn't always mean fleeing at high speed with tail held high. They take advantage of whatever cover is around. That might be a fence row, a drainage ditch, or a roundabout route that involves some thicket. Fleeing deer have been clocked at more than 40 miles an hour. Deer are not long-distance runners. They're more like 100-yard dash sprinters. Some hunters actually can run down a deer by following them at a fast pace. They have been witnessed leaping fences as high as 8 feet. That's from a standing start. One New York game official measured a running broad jump by a buck at 29 feet. Knowing the life cycle of the whitetail is important if you wish to locate and harvest deer. Michigan wildlife biologist John Azoga has been studying deer relationships longer and more intensely than anybody else in the country. He has discovered that there are 2 distinct deer societies. One society is the female with her young. The second whitetail society is made up of buck deer. John Azoga's research has proved adult does dominate the herd. It's a matriarchal society.
The family group in the whitetail consisted of little more than a doe, her fawn, and possibly a yearling. But our studies haven't shown that at all. Our studies have shown that, first of all, that you have basically 2 societies. You have a female young society and you have a male society. And these are 2 very distinct groups who spend much of their life in separate situations. In fact, there is some evidence to suggest that the males and the females occupy different niche relationships within the range. That is, they occupy during much of the year different cover types in different situations. But in the female situation, it's very much a matriarchal system. That is, as a female produces daughters throughout her life, that these individuals have a very close social tie. They have very true social bonds. They occupy a common range. And although they're solitary at times of the year, like at parturition when they have fawns, there are other times of the year that they regroup and they probably winter together as one contiguous group of deer. Females are most solitary during the spring, during June when they're having new fawns. They're actually territorial at that time. They drive other deer away. They defend a given area to rear their fawns and protect their fawns within it. But then as the summer wears on and the fawns grow and become more capable of functioning like the adults, they gradually begin to follow the doe more, and at some point are actually introduced into the system. So then the female groups and their young begin to unite, like in August probably, or at least by September. And during October, it would be quite likely to see groups of females and their young. So during the fall, they would be actually more gregarious, and you would find larger groups at that time.
Is that when the bucks, the young bucks, are sort of kicked out of the clan and go off on their own?
That is a very key time for the young male. Yeah, you see, actually, for a year and a half, he is part of that female system. He never really leaves his ancestral range. He's in constant contact with his female relatives and his aunts and his cousins and so forth. But at that time, as he becomes sexually functional, as he becomes sexually active, he sheds velvet, he becomes a little bit more feisty. He's still dominated by his female kin. And I think it's that domination that, at least in part, causes him to disperse and find a new area. And when he does disperse, he encounters new deer. New females respond differently to him. They don't know him as an individual, not as a particular identity, so he's accepted differently by strange deer.
Would that be nature's way of preventing a lot of inbreeding among deer?
That's very much the case. In fact, that has been the question in some instances where people would say, well, what happens if we shoot off all the bucks in an area? Then all you have left are these young bucks. What about inbreeding in the system? We've had this raised in our enclosure, the question, what about inbreeding?
Does it have a problem?
It's not, because it's a perfect protection against it, because the females are not receptive to males of their own clan. They actually dominate them and force them out of the area. So it's just a perfect protection against inbreeding, regardless of how bad things may look structurally or density-wise or whatever.
Mature does of about 4 years of age and older return to the same fawning areas each spring. Such areas may be as small as 10 acres or as large as 30, depending on how much the deer are crowded. The gestation period is 204 to 210 days. Undernourished does in poor food regions usually will have but a single fawn. They also will abort their fawn or have a fawn that is born dead or dies shortly after birth. This is very common with poorly fed deer. 63% of the fawns of 2-year-old does die when there is a high deer density. Scientists have also discovered that in times of stress, due to poor food conditions and crowding, does will have a higher percentage of buck fawns. These natural birth control systems are still insufficient to avoid tremendous suffering and large deer losses in the bottleneck of winter. Good game management and regulated hunting to harvest surplus whitetails, they're both needed if we're to have healthy deer herds. A doe spends the first few hours of her fawn's life cleaning and grooming it. If she has twin fawns, she'll conceal them separately within her territory and will nurse and groom them twice each 24 hours. She is never far away. Each time the doe returns, she moves the fawns to new beds up to 400 feet away from the old bedding spots to minimize danger from predators. Feces and urine produce scent, even though the fawns themselves are virtually scent-free in these early days of life. A healthy buck fawn will weigh an average 7.5 pounds. He'll double that weight in only 2 weeks. At 4 weeks of age, the fawn will increase its weight 4 times. With plentiful food, this fawn will be 150 to 170 pounds and sexually mature at 18 months of age. A common predator on newborn deer is the black bear. Others are coyotes, bobcats, and foxes. After about 25 days, the fawns are almost always with the adult doe. There is little association with other deer in the clan until the fawns are more than 3 months old. June, July, and August are growing, feeding, and resting months for whitetails. The deer are most difficult to locate in this lush summer period with heavy foliage. Beside the normal visibility problems in the wild, deer are isolated in smaller clans and do not move around very much. Food is usually very plentiful. However, by autumn, there is a regrouping of related does and their fawns on their ancestral range. Fawns born in late May and early June remain with the doe, who will run with her fawns from the previous year. This is why you'll often see a couple of adult-sized deer and 3 or 4 younger antlerless deer running together. Remember that by hunting season, the fawns have lost their spots and they're difficult to distinguish from adults unless they're standing side by side. As we get into the fall rutting period, things begin to happen fast in the whitetail's world. By the fall firearm season in most states, when most of us hunt our deer, the rut influence on deer behavior is paramount. By understanding the rut and how it affects whitetails, we increase our chances of seeing more deer, especially trophy bucks. The desire to locate mates causes the deer to move around much more at this time of the year. Over most of the whitetail's range, the females come into estrus, or into heat, around the middle of October, and again in the middle of November, and for the third and final time of the season, in the middle of December. Of course, if she is bred in October, then she will not recycle or come into heat again in November or December. She has to find a buck, or he has to find her, during one of these estrus cycle periods, which lasts about 26 to 36 hours. Understanding the rut means understanding antler development and growth. First, antlers are not horns. Buffalo have horns, which are a hollow, permanent, hard structure retained for life by the animal. These are antlers. Elk and moose carry the largest antlers among all members of the deer family. These massive racks are shed each winter, and a new set of antlers are grown starting early in the spring. The whitetail go through this same antler growth, development, and shedding. Antlers are the fastest growing animal tissue. A healthy fat buck's antlers will grow a ½ an inch per day at the peak of the growing period until they are fully hardened, bone-like, mature antlers in the early fall. New antlers will begin growing around April in most parts of the country. Covered with a membrane that is charged with blood vessels, the new antlers are tender and they'll bleed if bruised. That's one of the reasons that bucks are less active at this time. Antlers may become deformed by an injury during this period of development from spring until early summer. Antler growth is triggered by the pituitary gland, which itself is triggered by the increasing amount of daylight in the spring. By fall, the increased flow of male hormones causes the antlers to fully develop and harden. The old myth says that bucks polish their antlers because they're itchy. Well, this just isn't so. At this time, there are no nerves within the antlers. They are hard, solid bone. When the blood vessels dry up in this hardening period, the soft membrane covering called velvet simply withers away. Buck rubbing is the animal's way of leaving marks to show dominance and to announce his territory. All antlered bucks rub on trees and some bushes. This is extremely important in the weeks ahead, It's vital in our locating of deer, especially big bucks. The bigger the buck, the bigger the tree he will usually use as a rubbing tree. Bucks with rocking chair racks are the stuff that hunters' dreams are made of, and they're not easy to find. Big bucks like this one need 3 important things to grow big antlers. They have to live long, they have to eat well, and they have to have the right genetic background. To live long means 3.5 to 8.5 years of age. Now that's a long time for a buck in the wild. After his 8th year of life, if they live that long, and few do, they'll be past their prime and the antlers will be smaller. Bucks rarely live more than 12 years in the wild. Does will live but a few years longer. Good antler development requires all 3 of those things. Good diet means an abundant supply of high-quality food that includes the necessary minerals of the soil. Good genetics means that if a buck's ancestors produced scrawny racks, then he'll also produce scrawny racks, even if he has good food and a long life. It's important for the trophy hunter especially to understand the implications here. For example, regions which historically produced trophies will usually continue to produce trophies, barring some unforeseen natural disaster like a forest fire or massive changes in farming practices. Remember, I said usually, because there may be a period of food shortage which will result in a season or 2 with fewer trophy bucks. To locate these traditional big buck regions, you start by examining the record books and check the kill figures for your state game area. Once you find the big buck areas which historically produce the big guys, concentrate on specific spots within these areas where hunting pressure is light. You won't find many trophy racks in areas of high deer harvest because most of the bucks are cropped off at an early age. Often, as many as 60 to 70 or 75% of the bucks harvested in heavily hunted areas will be only 1 1/2 years of age. By the way, it's another myth that you can determine the deer's age by the number of antler points. The only way you can tell the age of a deer is to carefully examine the number of teeth and the wear on those teeth. And that's a job for a trained biologist. Deer eat 600 different species of plants, yet only a few are important to us as hunters. Talk to the farmers, the foresters, the game biologists, and the other local folks who know which foods are attracting deer in the area you plan to hunt. Basically, find the food and you'll find the deer. Listing all the prime foods here would serve no purpose, because what is prime in the north isn't a prime food in the south. Certain farm crops are prime everywhere. I'm talking about corn, apples, beets, tobacco, alfalfa, rye, potatoes, just to name of the few more popular deer foods that are found in farm country. Deer also love to eat ornamental shrubs in suburbia or down on a nursery farm. They cause many millions and millions of dollars in tree and crop damage each year. A deer typically eats enough food each day to equal about 3% of its own body weight. In other words, one adult deer will eat slightly more than 1 ton of food per year. Michigan biologists in one winter study found deer in this stressful period need about twice as much food. They simply burn up more calories trying to keep warm and in struggling to move in deep snow. This is that bottleneck period of winter that we mentioned. This is the time of a life and death daily struggle for deer to find enough to eat. Researchers call it bottleneck because the winter carrying capacity of the deer range is the factor which determines how many deer can live in an area. In other words, There may be excellent quality and quantity of food in spring, summer, and fall, but the squeeze comes at this time in the dead of winter. Of course, food is a primary need. The old saying, find the food and you find the critter, is only partly true here. Find the food and you find the deer if that food supply is close to adequate resting or bedding area.
Deer don't like to move any more than they have to.
However, if the choice food on today's menu is corn, and the cornfield offers both food and cover, the deer may bed down right in the middle of the cornfield. If the corn is cut and harvested, yet the spillage on the ground still offers adequate food, the deer will continue to feed in this area, but they will be bedding or resting in a nearby woodlot, a swale, a swamp, or some other cover that's close by. Learn these feeding times and patterns. Most people believe deer bed down all day and feed only at night. That's not true. Recent research has shown that deer have major natural movements which come every 5 hours. That includes a peak period of movement at midday. Now, these major movement periods occur at sunrise, sunset, midday, and 2 times during the night. Whitetails never linger much in one spot while feeding, even if it's a favorite food. They are constantly alert. Their instincts force them to nibble here, walk a little, nibble there, always alert for danger.
Their resting or sanctuary area, like this swamp right behind me, is never too far from their food supply, which is up here on the high ground, up in the hardwoods, where there's a good acorn crop this year. The deer are never far between the resting areas and the feeding areas. Now, your best bet is to find the runways connecting these resting or sanctuary areas to the feeding areas. That's where you're going to be in a good position to intercept the deer as they move between these 2 types of cover that they definitely need. Knowing where deer live, knowing what they need, what kind of cover, what kind of food, and then a full understanding of all of their natural defenses. You put all of that together, understand it all, and only then can you find deer on purpose and not just stumble into them occasionally. One of the best ways I know to accomplish this is take a small area, say about a square mile, no bigger, and really master that area. Know every brush pile, every tree, every twig, because that's what the deer does. That's the best advice I can give you to really mastering an area and finding the deer on purpose.
Here is some typical deer country in an agricultural area. We shall examine it to determine where the deer will be feeding and resting and which routes they will be taking between each of these spots. We shall call this our magic mile, and we'll be upgrading it and reporting back on this from time to time as we progress. Deer are not ghosts. They do leave tracks and other sign wherever they go. Reading these signs in a home territory is like reading a book. Here in this magic mile or ideal range, we have cornfields along the side and a woodlot here. This is a route a deer will travel to and from the area where they feed. Since this corn is uncut and it's tall enough to conceal an adult deer, the animals may feed here much later in the day. In this neighboring rye field, the deer will enter later in the afternoon and abandon this open and rather naked field shortly after first light in the morning. There is no protective cover here to give them the security they need. This fence line along the rye field is a good spot to check for tracks to and from this thicket. Deer will probably be laying in there during their resting period. This oak stand along the ridge is worth checking out during the pre-season on-site scouting that you have to do. Look for evidence of deer pawing through the leaves for fallen acorns. Remember, the deer will not expend any more energy than they have to fill their 4 stomachs. For example, they'll go for the easiest pickings first and dig for acorns later, only when they have to.
Acorns are a high-energy food, and in the winter months, they'll dig through a foot of crusted snow for acorns. We have shown you how to recognize these needs in an agricultural setting. They're really the same needs out in the big woods, except that you must think on a larger scale of real estate. Food typically is harder to find in these so-called big woods areas, so the deer's home territory will be larger. The key to recognizing home territory in either the farmland or a big wood setting is in finding active deer sign. Of course, the best time for this scouting is before the hunting season begins. Once the rutting begins, and this may happen smack in the middle of hunting season in some territories of our country, you will have to re-scout the area. The rut makes all deer more active, especially the mature bucks. Their daily movement patterns will change. Deer feed heavily in the fall to fatten up for the cold winter months ahead. The bucks continue feeding in the fall as the rut begins, but they burn up so much more energy as the mating urge takes control of their lives that they'll lose up to 20% of their body weight. For a detailed examination of the rut's implications for the sportsman, be sure to watch Successful Whitetail Deer Hunting. Here's another scrape. You see, a scrape like this will be located always under overhanging branches. They're usually located close to very active runways, like we've got an active runway coming out of the swamp. We have another active runway coming across the front. The buck will come in here and he'll make his mark. His mark is usually about 5 paw scrapes this way and about 5 that way. The buck will then urinate on his tarsal glands. He'll lick the scrape. He'll also brush his antlers under these overhanging limbs. Nearby, you may see a fresh buck rub where he's rubbed his antlers on a small sapling. That's not always the key thing. There could be a rub nearby. There doesn't always have to be. This is the most important thing to look for, an active scrape. You can tell it's active because the buck has urinated in it. And if you get down really carefully and sniff it, you can actually smell a musky odor. And that'll tell you for sure that buck's been here within, say, the last 24 hours. Now, a buck makes many of these scrapes, like leaving his calling cards all over his territory in the woods. A doe will come by. When she's ready, she'll smell this scrape. She'll come over and she'll make a splash of urine in the scrape as well. Once she does this and the buck comes back and he picks up her scent, which is full of her hormones, then this becomes an active scrape. He'll freshen this scrape, he'll scrape on it, he'll urinate in it, and he'll stay nearby. The buck has made his mark. He has left his scent here in this scrape. The doe has spotted it. She likes what she smelled based on the hormones that the buck deposited. She also leaves a splash of urine in this spot. This was one of many scrapes this buck made. But all of a sudden, because the doe responded to it, it now becomes not a secondary scrape or not just one of the scrapes, but the active scrape. And what that means is that that buck will stay much closer to this spot than any of the other spots he has in the area because that doe left her calling card right here. And that's your clue to you should have a blind nearby where you can watch this area. The wind is coming from this direction. It's blowing across here. Your blind should be down here, okay? When that buck comes back to check this scrape, he may not come right and stick his nose back in this spot. He may be slightly downwind, and he'll be able to smell any odors that the doe deposited. So you also have to be downwind so he can't smell you. An active scrape like this, as I said, is your very best evidence that there's a good buck in the immediate area. It's better than any other clue you'll find in the woods. Another trick is to take a stick, don't use your hands or your boot, scrape some leaves and some twigs onto the scrape like that, okay? And come back here later this afternoon, just before dark, or maybe tomorrow morning, and see if that buck has cleaned all this out, has freshened the scrape, as we say. Now, there's another trick which is explained much more fully in the production called the successful whitetail deer hunting. In that, we talk about how to use buck lures on the branches and in and around these scrapes. But that's in the other production called Successful Whitetail Deer Hunting. The biggest boss buck in a home territory is called the alpha buck, and he dominates and intimidates the younger males, and he does most of the breeding. The smaller males rarely challenge the alpha buck. Their social order has long since been established in their all-male society before this rutting season gets underway. And buck deer will fight only occasionally and only when one alpha buck crosses into the home territory of another alpha buck. This usually happens when that big buck is in very hot, close pursuit of a doe in heat. Serious injury is unusual in these jousts.
Let's return to our magic mile of typical hunting area. A good deer density here would be about 40 animals. Some biologists tell us that the average hunter will have difficulty seeing any deer when the density drops below 40 animals per square mile. Now, you might think at first that 40 deer per square mile is a lot of deer, but remember, a square mile is a lot of land. It's 640 acres, or 259 hectares, or 2.59 square kilometers. Male to female ratio will be 50-50, biologically speaking. But hunters think of deer as either bucks or does, with the bucks all having antlers. Remember, many bucks are antlerless, or they may have sublegal size antlers. In most states, an antlered buck means one with antlers of more than 3 inches in length. So, out of our 40 deer, we may have only 10 with legal size antlers. And of those 10, we may have only 2 or 3 with racks, or trophy size antlers of 8 or 10 points.
You know, once you scout the home territory of deer, you get really familiar with it. You know where the runways are, where the feeding and resting areas are. Seeing deer will be a little easier. It gets discouraging, and when I get discouraged after a while, I like to remind myself that deer are somewhere all the time. Think about it.
It helps to have the big picture, which you'll get from larger maps, which are obtainable from game departments, Forest Service offices, the Farm Bureau, Bureau of Land Management, and other such public or semi-public sources. Then narrow down your hunting area as we suggested, so that you're very familiar with your own magic square mile. Now, you make your own detailed map with the food areas, resting areas, game trails, escape routes, watering spots, and buck rubs and scrapes. Fill in all the special information from your own scouting efforts. Feed in the data from biologists, game managers, farmers, and other landowners who you should have been talking to long before the hunting season to get permission to hunt on their land.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.
You're welcome. And you get
These are just a few of the tools the deer hunter needs, in addition to his gun, bow, or camera. This topo map, a compass, a plat book, your own custom detailed map, and your knowledge of deer should all be in your own toolkit.
Peter's gonna... And we're going to drive to these guys. Hopefully, somebody will get a nice buck out of this drive.
How long do you think it's going to take when you start to get to us?
This is going to be 20 minutes at the most, from the time we start driving until somebody's going to get a shot, hopefully.
We'll hear you guys hollering, we'll know you're getting close.
We have mentioned deer having various defenses, such as a keen sense of hearing. But the deer themselves make a variety of sounds out in the wild. Recognizing and interpreting these sounds will help you while you're hunting. The most common of these, of course, is the snort or the blow. And when you hear it, it's usually too late to do anything about it.
and both bucks and does snort or blow. The bucks will also cough or grunt at each other. That's not a very common sound out in the outdoors, but when you ever hear it, I'll repeat it. It goes, That's the sound that one buck makes when he suddenly is confronted by another buck right in his territory. It's sort of a challenge. It's not a common sound, but when you hear it, it's a very important sound because you know there's at least 2 bucks in the immediate area. Another buck vocalization that you might hear, again, not too common, but you might hear this, it's a grunting sound like a pig grunting. I won't even try to imitate it, it's such a common sound. But when you hear that, what that means is there's a buck with his nose to the ground, hot on the trail of a doe in heat, and he'll be virtually oblivious to everything else except that female. Deer tell us a lot with their body language, and a good hunter learns to read deer. Here are some of the obvious and more important body language signs that deer send to us. This deer is calm for the moment, but as the tail begins to rise, the deer is getting nervous. This is the most common sight, a flag waving goodbye. Just because the deer has scented, heard, or seen you and is bounding off, it doesn't mean he's headed for the next county. Studies of deer flight behavior in the Adirondack Mountains of New York reveal that even in hunting areas, the mean flight distance for antlered bucks is less than 60 yards. Frightened does in a study area ran less than 38 yards before stopping. Spike bucks were the boldest or the most foolish, since they ran less than 22 yards on the average. Antlered bucks ran the farthest, 58 yards. As soon as the fleeing deer puts what he considers a safe amount of cover between you and him, he'll stop, and usually he'll look back. If the deer is forced to cross a large open field or a grassy plain, he'll keep moving until reaching sanctuary on the other side. On the other hand, in a thick forest, a deer may take only 2 or 3 hops and then feel secure enough to stop. And I've seen deer actually lie down in a thicket following just a few hops. Whitetails are local animals who usually find all they need in life in a square mile or possibly 2. The quality of their habitat is what determines exactly how big their home range will be. In the deep south, the deer tend to be even more localized, but all whitetails will move a long distance due to special things such as river bottom flooding or major farming changes or fires. In the north woods of Minnesota, studies found deer move an average of just over 5 miles from where they spend their winters in deer yards to where they're shot the next hunting season. In a similar yarding study in Wisconsin, deer moved an average of 6 miles from their traditional deer yards to where hunters found them the following season. A deer yard is not a pleasant place. It's a cold, dark, thick swamp with usually very little quality food. Deer die by the tens of thousands during severe winters. Deer move into yards winter after deadly winter because they find some protection from strong cold winds and from heavy snow. They also come here because this is where they were taught to go by the adult does who run the clan. There may even be more food just across the road, but the deer will return to these same browsed out yards of their ancestors year after year. Researchers found that deer will move en masse into yards quite early, often during the hunting seasons if the weather is harsh. During such a cold season, hunters who expected to find deer on their upland range will complain that the whitetail population has drastically declined. So remember, when severe weather comes early, the deer may not be in their usual haunts. If you're a wildlife photographer or just wish to see deer, visit a deer yard. These cedar swamps of the north are well known to game managers. They can tell you where they are. Real sportsmen do not hunt deer in yards like this when conditions are like this. In fact, severe yarding usually does not happen in most northern states until January or February, and that's after the sport hunting seasons have ended. Seeing a deer in the wild is a real pleasure, unless you happen to be a farmer or a nursery owner whose crops are being destroyed by hungry deer. Seeing a deer in the glare of your headlights is a different sort of a thrill, a dangerous and frightening thing. In Michigan and Pennsylvania alone, more than 45,000 deer are killed on the highways each year. Nationally, the number is astounding, and there are no statistics on how many whitetails are hit, only to crawl off into the woods and die an agonizing death. The balance of nature is based on a predator-prey relationship and the availability of food. But the whitetail's changing environment has left it with few natural predators. The mountain lion, the wolf, the grizzly, just to name a few, have not adapted as well as the whitetail has and no longer have a balancing effect on deer populations. In their place, we have fences, cars, free-roaming dogs, the chainsaw, and the plow. Mother Nature takes control when deer become too numerous for their home territories. The oldest adults and the smallest fawns are the first to die. Surviving deer are often in such poor condition that they'll produce fewer fawns in the spring. Sport hunting is another form of harvesting. It is the game manager's most effective tool to prevent deer from overpopulating and exceeding the carrying capacity of their range. Some would argue its effectiveness, but thanks to the efforts of game managers and to the financial contributions from sportsmen, we have more deer today than when Columbus discovered America. There are expanding whitetail populations in almost all the lower 48 states. It's a paradox that the whitetail's ability to adapt to a changing environment is its most serious long-term threat to survival. Although some would rather leave the harvesting to Mother Nature in her less visible and often more cruel way, I, like nearly 12 million others, prefer sport hunting. You must decide for yourself. Whatever you decide, I'm sure you'll agree that the whitetail is a fascinating game animal and a challenge to get close to in its natural environment. In this tape, I have shared techniques which have served me well for 30 years, techniques which have enabled me to get close to deer on purpose and not just by chance. No matter which way you hunt, with gun, bow, camera, or binoculars, we hope this information has increased your understanding of the whitetail and the very essence of the deer.
The whitetail deer, North America's most popular big game animal. 3M Sportsman's video collection will help you become a more successful deer hunter with the only complete series of award-winning original programs about deer. We're the best at making you better. Catch the elusive whitetail deer in his private moments. A year-round portrait of this beautiful animal, from spring fawning to the fall rut. Secrets of deer behavior that few hunters are privileged to see. Top hunters know that deer hunting is more than just a lucky walk in the woods. To be successful, you must know the way of the whitetail. In this award-winning program, the first deer hunting video to receive Outdoor Life's 5-star rating, Jerry Chiappetta shows you the whitetail's needs, habits, and defenses, the foundation of knowledge you need to find deer consistently, on purpose, under all kinds of hunting conditions. It takes more than a few hunting tips and a lot of luck to become a successful whitetail hunter. It takes experience, know-how, and a sound hunting strategy. In successful whitetail deer hunting, Jerry Chiappetta shares a lifetime of experience, showing you the reasons why his hunting strategies and techniques work. Know-how that will help you put a buck in your sights every season. A trophy whitetail, the ultimate challenge in deer hunting. Be sure to join Jerry on his 2-hour journey to uncover the secret strategies used by expert hunters to consistently harvest a bragging-sized whitetail from Texas to Pennsylvania, from the upper Midwest to Canada. If you want to experience the thrill of hunting deer close up, watch Bow Hunting for Whitetail Deer, acclaimed as the most detailed, in-depth video on the subject. Master bow hunter Jim Doherty shows you his secrets to success, selecting the right equipment, developing the right attitude for bow hunting, and getting incredibly close for a clean kill. In successful mule deer hunting, Jim Zumbo takes you in pursuit of the Rocky Mountain mule deer, the spirit of the high country. More than just an adventure program, Jim shows you new, innovative strategies that modern mule deer hunters use. Jim will prepare you for the deer hunting trip of a lifetime. From the gentle stillness of a deep forest glade to the heart-stopping excitement of a high country hunt, no other programs give you more in-depth information and true-life action than the Sportsman's Video Collection from 3M, the fastest, easiest way to improve your deer hunting skills. And if you love hunting, fishing, and other sports, think of 3M as your total video resource for outdoor adventure. The excitement of calling a bird into your gun. The satisfaction of making a clean shot. And the companionship of a well-trained dog. If you like the challenge of upland game bird and waterfowl hunting, 3M Sportsman's Video Collection gives you the thrill of being there and the knowledge you need to master the sport. Explosive action, in-depth information, incredible scenes. 3M Sportsman's Video Collection brings you the world of bass fishing with America's top anglers like Doug Hannon, Ricky Klein, and Al Linder. A comprehensive learning series that'll make you the best bass angler on your lake. You'll be glad you watch these programs when you catch the bass of a lifetime. If it's excitement you're after, come fishing with the experts from 3M Scientific Anglers and learn ways to catch more and bigger trout on the fly. You'll learn where to find trout in a stream and ways to present the right fly with the perfect cast so you can catch the most elusive trout during hatch and non-hatch situations. Plus, there's steelheading for 20-pound rainbows or going for the ultimate saltwater challenge. Let 3M Scientific Anglers bring home the excitement while you learn a lifetime of mastery techniques that will help you become the best fly fisherman you can be.